In 1985, an impressionable 10-year-old walked into his local arcade and saw Sega's Hang-On for the very first time. He had seen forward-scrolling arcade games before, but never one this smooth and fast. It impressed him so much that Sega was etched into his mind as a force to be remembered. That following year, Outrun made its debut, again impressing him beyond measure. Its combination of speed, music, and gameplay were so far ahead of other games, it was in a different league. That little dude was me, and those games were my very first introduction to the man known as Yu Suzuki. He would go on to help produce some of Sega's most iconic hardware and software releases, both at home and in the arcade. By the time the 1990s rolled around, this dude and the teams he worked with pumped out the who's who of cutting-edge gaming. I mean, scrolling through this guy's resume is like looking at the best of list for the entire company. There's no mincing words here. This fellow is one of the biggest reasons I'm a Sega fan. As we entered the 21st century, changes at Sega had a profound effect on their business decisions and the software Yu Suzuki created. One of his final projects before leaving Sega AM2 was Outrun 2, a sequel to one of the most prolific and memorable driving games ever made. It made its way home first on the original Xbox, and in this episode, we will talk a bit about it, take a look at some of the different versions, and find out if it lived up to the monumental task of being as incredible as the Superscaler original. The arcade version of Outrun 2 was first released in late 2003 for the Sega Chihiro arcade board, or what was essentially an OG Xbox with more RAM and the ability to read GD-ROM discs. It uses a fully polygonal 3D engine, has multiple viewpoints from which to race, and allows you to choose your music before you begin. Like the original, it uses checkpoints and time limits to keep pushing you through each leg of the race, and you again have the ability to choose your route at various places. The single-player portion of Outrun 2 is almost exclusively a driving game, not a competitive racer. While you do have the timer to deal with, the other cars on the track are simply there to get in the way, and not competitors that you need to overtake in order to gain a higher placement. The goal is always to stay ahead of the timer until you make it to the final stage and the finish line. When it came home to the Xbox the following year, the port was astoundingly close because of the similarities in the hardware. Sumo Digital was at the helm of the home version, and not to be content with a mere port, they chose to add a ton of additions. You get unlockable cars, more music, more tracks, and a whole heap of extra modes. You get the Outrun Race, which is the basic arcade mode where you can choose your own route, Heart Attack Mode, which is a series of challenges given to you by your girlfriend, and Time Attack Mode, which is a free run without any traffic to score your best time. You also get the Outrun Challenge, which gives you 101 missions to undertake. These missions include competitive races against AI components, drifting challenges, and a bunch of obstacle-based stuff with traffic cones, lane changes, and avoiding other cars. Doing well grants you access to hidden rewards like tracks, cars, music, and even the original 1986 arcade game. Needless to say, there is plenty of stuff to do here, plenty to unlock, and hours upon hours of replay value. The actual gameplay itself is typical Sega arcade-style driving fantasy, or to put it simply, it's completely unrealistic. It focuses nearly 100% of the action on speed and power sliding. There is little worry about braking or hitting the turns too fast. Here you want to keep the speed up at all costs, and the gameplay is designed to let you do just that. Feathering the brake does give you some control over when your power slide starts and changing its direction quickly, but you'll never intentionally need to slow down. Each car does have its own speed and handling specifications, which does affect how aggressive you can be while power sliding. It makes for an exciting time and a great extension of the original Outrun's mechanics. Upon its initial release, it also had up to 8-player races via Xbox Live, though you can no longer access it due to the servers being shut down many years ago. It does still have the 8-player System Link feature, should you have the setup to support it. The original arcade version ran at 480p and 60 frames per second. This was not compromised in the home port, which also gives you a widescreen option, though the two-dimensional heads-up display gets stretched in the process. Otherwise, the engine on display here is stunning. It's fast, smooth, and the draw distance is as far to the horizon as you could want. There's loads of nice effects too. Water shimmers in the background. Thick, transparent clouds grace the skyline, and there's always some nice animations popping off in the environment around you. Texture quality and detail is bright, vivid, and nothing short of gorgeous for a 6th generation product. Every area you race has its own unique look and theme, often changing the time of day or weather conditions around you. The car models are outstanding as well, both in visual appeal and variety. Combine that with the nearly flawless performance, and you have one of the best looking games to grace that system, and indeed that entire generation. It's even more impressive when you consider the sheer volume of stuff on the screen. The road is always full of traffic, yet rarely do you see any hits to the performance. Rounding out your visual features are a few different viewpoints for you to race from, as well as the ability to change the color of your car. As iconic as Outrun's visuals were, the music was just as memorable. You get remixed editions of the classic Splash Wave, Magical Sound Shower, and Passing Breeze, which all sound great. There's also some new editions that don't sound too bad either. You can unlock more, including tunes from the original arcade version. I have some samples here I'm sure you'll enjoy. I was impressed by this game from the moment I first played it. The gameplay was just my kind of fun. It completely shed any attempt to be realistic and focused entirely on making the navigation about speed and getting around turns and obstacles like they do in big budget movies. The level of control you have over power sliding is impressive as well. As you enter a turn, you can choose to stay to the inside or pull to the outside depending on what's going on around you. This gives you a great amount of control over avoiding traffic and keeping your speed up. Add in the great graphics and sound and it makes for a heck of a compelling product. Sumo Digital also went above and beyond by including some tracks from Daytona 2 and Scud Race, two Sega arcade games that have never been ported home. As much as I'd like to tell you it's all perfect, it's of course not. With Xbox Live down for the original Xbox, there's no easy way to have head-to-head local multiplayer of any kind to compensate. If you ever had the luxury of battling a friend in this one at the arcade, you'd know that's a real shame. It does have something called party missions, but this mode forces you to play by taking turns. As I mentioned, it does have the System Link option, which requires multiple systems, multiple copies of the game, and multiple televisions. This is cool if you have the space for all that, but practically speaking, the lack of a split screen mode is still disappointing. You'll also notice that the majority of my capture footage is in the 4:3 aspect ratio. As I mentioned earlier, using widescreen stretches the 2D elements of things like the heads-up display and loading screens, and I honestly can't stand that. It looks bad enough to where I'd rather play without it. I'm also not a fan of the fact there's no option to play with the arcade's original gameplay. Despite being called Outrun 2, this actually uses the tweaks seen in the update Outrun 2 SP to make the gameplay more forgiving and accessible. The original arcade version of Outrun 2 played differently and was a more difficult game to master, primarily its power slide, which did not automatically straighten up when coming out of a turn. Outside of these few nitpicks, however, Outrun 2 on the Xbox is definitely one of the better arcade racing games of the time. If you don't have access to or have never owned an original Xbox, there are a few other ways to play Outrun 2. Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast made its way to the PC, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and even the PSP a few years later. This was based on the Outrun 2 SP update with new courses and additional content. There was also a digital-only release called Outrun 2 Online Arcade, released for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. That you can't buy it anymore because it's been pulled down thanks to Sega's Ferrari license expiring. The main difference between the Outrun 2 and Outrun 2 SP track selections is the former has areas based on European locations, while the latter is based on locations in the United States. Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast adds additional cars and music as well, and includes a 15-course continuous play mode that allows you to hit every single course back to back. Since Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast was not released for the PlayStation 2 in Japan, it got its very own version of Outrun 2 SP. Of these, my favorite version was the Xbox 360 digital release. It's the easiest for me to play and had the best visuals of any version I've seen. I still own it and play it often. Outrun 2 was released while Sega was actually still Sega, right before the Sammy merger in 2004. This sort of made it part of the company's swan song, a final flash of brilliance from a developer I respected and admired for almost 20 years. I grew up playing his games, and they contributed countless hours of fun and excitement for me and my friends. It was bittersweet to receive a game of this caliber while witnessing Sega being swallowed up by another company, changing its future forever. The story doesn't get a happy ending either, because now that Sega no longer holds the license to the cars in these games, there is no easy modern way to play them. Outrun 2 Online Arcade has been delisted from all digital availability, leaving only older non-HD options available for consoles. You can get the PC version up and running with a little effort, and the original Xbox version is backwards compatible on the Xbox 360. But it's a real bummer that this isn't available in 4K on modern systems. I know at this point I sound like a broken record, but it's just one more game in Sega's back catalog of titles that they just refuse to release and make money on. It would have been a killer addition to the Sega Ages line instead of some of those ancient rehashes we've seen 50 times before. Sega should be celebrating the software Yu Suzuki created for them instead of hiding it away. His legacy deserves better, and so does this game. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.